In this video I will explain how to understand the philosophy of Hegel. The first thing we need to know to understand the philosophy of Hegel is that there is a certain triad in Hegel, namely thesis, antithesis and synthesis, and this is absolutely essential for understanding Hegel. It appears everywhere in his writing, and he is completely obsessed with those three words, and he puts everything in this three-part structure where you first have the thesis, and then you have the antithesis, which contradicts the thesis, but then he sublimates the two things and does the Aufhebung, where both things get synthesized into one final synthesis. So that's the first thing you need to understand about Hegel. The second thing is that the thesis, antithesis, synthesis triad has absolutely nothing to do with Hegel. If you actually look at his books, then you will find that he never uses those words. He uses the word antithesis once, where he quotes another philosopher, but he never has actually this. He never actually uses them as a triad and uses those words rarely to nowhere at all. And there are many philosophy courses which teach you Hegel and tell you that he came up with this thesis, antithesis, synthesis triad, and this is just a complete myth. Like, this is a common misconception, but it's completely wrong. Okay. That's the second thing you need to know about Hegel. The third thing you need to know about Hegel is that the triad thesis, antithesis, synthesis is completely essential to Hegel's philosophy. He doesn't exactly use those words, but all of his thought has the structure, and people came then up with thesis, antithesis, synthesis to explain how Hegel's thought works. So Hegel uses slightly different words, but it's the same thing. So you have still thesis, antithesis, synthesis, like he just called it concrete, abstract, absolute instead, but it's the same thing. So anyone who says that actually in Hegel, in his writing, these words don't appear, those people are just completely wrong. It's just a common misconception that Hegel didn't use that, and that it's, yeah. So it's actually really important, this thesis, antithesis, synthesis thing, and it gives you really the key to understanding the work. Like, you don't really understand the work until you understand that everything is in the three-part structure. So, the fourth point you need to know about Hegel is that the thesis, antithesis, synthesis thing has absolutely nothing to do with Hegel, and the triad which I mentioned previously, with concrete, abstract, absolute, this is not really a triad in Hegel. Like, I mean, concrete and abstract are two opposing forces, but they don't really form a triad with absolute. Like, the absolute is something completely different, and it's certainly not the same thing as thesis, antithesis, synthesis, and so the previous point is just complete and utter nonsense, and Hegel doesn't have this kind of progression from thesis to antithesis and synthesis. This is completely foreign to Hegel, and if you really look at his works, you see that it makes no sense if you try to analyze it from a thesis, antithesis, synthesis structure. So the fifth point is that thesis, antithesis, synthesis is absolutely essential for the philosophy of Hegel. This is like the key you need to understand Hegel. Like, because you see, the problem with Hegel is sometimes he didn't fully follow the arguments to their logical conclusion. So in the actual philosophy of Hegel, as you find it, there's maybe no thesis, antithesis, synthesis, but if you do it properly and think everything to the end, then you see that there should have been this triad in there. And that is an essential part for everything to make sense in a global perspective. So even though there isn't actually this triad in Hegel directly, it should have been there. And only after you put it in there does the whole thing make coherence and sense, and everything becomes clear. So if you say that thesis, antithesis, synthesis has nothing to do with Hegel, you are completely misleading, and you are preventing people from really understanding what the idea is. Okay, so that's point 5, and then point 6 is, of course, that the triad thesis, antithesis, synthesis has absolutely nothing to do with Hegel, and you have to have a very high IQ to understand Hegel, and the humor is extremely subtle, and without a solid grasp of transcendental idealism, most of the jokes will go right over a typical reader's head. There's also Hegel's definitely nihilistic outlook, definitely woven into his characterization. This, you know what I'm saying here, right? And so the next point is, of course, that it's absolutely essential for Hegel, but there's also the point that it has absolutely nothing to do with Hegel, and it's also absolutely essential to Hegel, and Hegel never used thesis, antithesis, synthesis. Okay, so with this you should now have a basic understanding of the philosophy of Hegel. So an example would be, we could for example consider the thesis that the thesis, antithesis, synthesis triad is absolutely essential for Hegel, and when we could consider the antithesis, and the antithesis would then be that the thesis, antithesis, synthesis triad has absolutely nothing to do with Hegel. And if we have those two opposing forces, then we are just confused and don't know what is going on, but what we can now do, we can simply form the synthesis, and once we have the synthesis, everything becomes clear. So that would be the first example of thesis, antithesis, synthesis. So that's example number one. Another example would be if we take the thesis geocentrism, where we say that the whole world revolves around the Earth. Then we can also look at the antithesis heliocentrism, and in the heliocentrism, the world revolves around the Sun. But if we want to do the synthesis of those two worldviews, what we do, we first look where the two parts disagree, and we look at the two parts where they agree, and when we combine the two parts where we disagree, and we take the G from geocentrism and the Heli from heliocentrism, and combine them into Hegeli, and when the resulting view is Hegeliocentrism, and that is the view that the whole world revolves around Hegel. So that would be another part where this triad structure is very useful. And yeah, that's everything what I wanted to do, explain about Hegel in this introduction video, and thanks for watching, and see you next time.